Welcome to the next edition of Business Law Focus. Great to have you with us. An absolute pleasure to welcome Ridwaan Boda, who's an executive in the corporate and commercial practice at ENS Africa with us. And Ridwaan is advising on some big TMT deals. He specializes in the TMT sector. And we want to unpack something quite interesting. In the last podcast, we spoke about this rise in climate-related litigation. But Ridwaan has done some interesting research in the growth in climate tech and climate technology as everyone moves on this ESG journey. And this is also creating a lot of opportunity, but also some risks and some areas and elements that the corporate sector and people that's switching on this new tech need to be very aware of. So Ridwaan, thanks very much for joining us, and maybe give us a bit of context on this rise of climate tech.
Thank you very much for having me today. Yes, so the term climate tech or climate technology generally refers to the application of technology and innovation to address climate change, to promote sustainability. It first gained popularity during the Paris Agreement in 2015, where this term climate tech came to the fore. And I think the context for climate tech is companies are under increasing pressure to adopt environmental, social, and governance practices, or commonly known as ESG practices. And the use of climate tech has become more appealing now than ever has been. Essentially, by harnessing innovative solutions that climate tech offers, companies can integrate and execute their ESG plans in various ways, including IT and data capture systems to ensure that organizations remain compliant with climate tech. When we look at climate tech very broadly, it applies to a number of sectors, including renewable energy storage, but it goes so far as electric vehicles. It also extends to sustainable agriculture practices, forestry practices, transportation solutions, smart grids, and a number of other applications. I think the list of climate technology solutions just seems to be increasing every day, and more innovation is coming to the market. When we look at globally from the research which we've conducted, currently climate tech market is worth approximately $2.5 trillion. So you can see a very, very significant industry. And investors are now focusing more and more on contributing capital towards longer-term projects, impactful projects, and outcome-focused projects as well. For companies, for entrepreneurs, for innovators, this presents a really, really great opportunity. But as with the adoption of any technology, it's not always without risk. And there's a number of imperatives which are taking place, and also a number of gray areas or hollow areas in the law, which doesn't seem to cater specifically for the adoption of climate tech. If I were to touch very briefly,
the regulatory landscape when it comes to ESG is evolving, and it's adapting pretty fast to these developments. Is it including a lot of the climate tech developments? I know a lot of it is about the projects and renewables and the rollout and the targets in line with the convention. Yes. Are we seeing regulation actually keeping pace?
The interesting thing, being a technology lawyer or specialist technology lawyer for over 15 years now, I can say very clearly that technology, the law can never keep up with technology. Yeah. So in as much as governments are trying to put in place initiatives to keep up with technology tends to outstrip, or the pace of and growth of technology tends to outstrip legal regulation. That being said, there are a number of industry-specific initiatives which are taking place. So a number of countries are looking, for example, at artificial intelligence technologies. How do we regulate that, especially as we apply it to things like autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and the like? When we're looking at things like power and alternative energy sources, more and more governments are starting to consider how do they create an environment or legal or regulatory environment that actually encourages this growth. And I think in South Africa, it's probably no different. Regulation is sporadic and in many instances even non-existent, because the simple fact of the matter is that regulation can never keep up with technology, and technology growth tends to outstrip the utility in regulation tends to be outstripped by the pace of technology growth. And there's this constant tussle which governments face globally is to Do we regulate certain types of technologies? Do we regulate certain types of practices? And if so, how is the best way to do that? There's no clear-cut answer, but there are a number of specific initiatives which are taking place with governments around the world in seeking to regulate specific types of industries. So I think for now we'll see regulation taking place more sporadically, more focused on specific types of technologies. So, for example, alternative energy, we may see regulation in that space. Eventually, things like electric vehicles, public transport systems, and the like. We already had very good data privacy legislation in the country, which, because of its principle or condition-based approach, it's fairly technology neutral. But the principles of legislation such as POPI, the Protection of Personal Information Act, can easily be applied to initiatives taking place under climate tech, especially in relation to data and the relation between data and climate tech.
Now, this heavy use of technology that's happening in tandem with moves to sustainability, it itself uses energy, right? I suppose there's a bit of a challenge there in balancing, this high use of tech and achieving sustainability goals.
Absolutely. So the use of tech sometimes actually is counterproductive to achieving sustainability goals. If we look at a very example, the use of blockchain technologies, especially the ones which enable things like cryptocurrencies and the like, these are extremely energy-hungry technologies, and they actually are detrimental to the environment. So in as much as companies adopt technology, seeking to adopt technology to embrace or to foster their sustainability goals, sometimes the very nature of the type of technologies which companies seek to adopt is actually harmful to the environment. And I use blockchain as one example, and there are a number of other types of technologies out there which, although very well-meaning, very well-intended, they actually do harm the environment. And this is something that, companies and organizations and entrepreneurs are going to constantly grapple with, is how do we bring the best technology to the market without harming the environment, without impacting on our ESG goals, and how do we actually create this climate for sustainable practices or sustainable technologies in a manner that does not harm the environment.
Can you give us some guidance on how organizations, companies can manage the risks?
Sure. So there's a number of initiatives which need to take place. I think the starting point for any type of initiative which organizations need to implement is there must be leadership at the board level.
Yeah.
If the board is not going to take accountability for ESG goals and for climate tech adoption, then that company is going to be in a lot of trouble down the line. I think one of the most often overlooked parts of corporate governance is that boards are still responsible for information governance and technology governance. So climate tech adoption is no different. When a company is looking to implement any type of climate technology solution or create one or take one to market, the board needs to take ownership of that. And what goes hand in hand with it is having in place proper policies in place to regulate climate tech adoption, and which also then ties in with the company's overall ESG goals and initiatives. It's no sense leaving it to your IT teams or your commercial teams or your marketing teams to say, go ahead and procure technology, if your board doesn't have a global view of, is this technology right for our business? Is it affecting our ESG goals? Is it harmful to our other initiatives? And ultimately, the board must adopt oversight, and policy implementation becomes critical. With the adoption of any policy, obviously training goes hand in hand with it. So does monitoring and fostering some form of culture of compliance. The next the next solution which companies should be adopting is ensuring that they conduct proper due diligence exercises to ensure that whatever climate tech solutions are being adopted, this will enable the organization to meet its business requirements and also its legal obligations, and importantly, its ESG goals and objectives. Further, it's critical that boards as well as their legal teams fully understand the impact or likely impact of regulations on technology. And sometimes regulations may be as is during this time, but also keeping an eye out to see what's coming, what's on the radar of my government, what's on the radar of other governments around the world. So having this crystal ball approach to regulation, that also becomes important, because the last thing a board wants to do is adopt some form of technology only for a year or 2 years down the line for governments to say this is not good enough and this is actually detrimental, and or we want you to scrap this technology, reinvest in a whole new type of technology. So understanding not just the regulatory environment as is, but also what the future regulatory landscape looks like, that becomes critical. Then another often overlooked part of interventions which companies need to take in fostering or in adopting climate tech is whenever you are negotiating your contracts with solution providers, ensuring that those contracts are drafted in a sound manner. So often we see clients coming to us with problems where they think they are procuring a certain type of technology. They think that this technology is going to help them achieve certain types of objectives, only for the contract to say something very different. So you may have a company which proposes a type of solution that promises a lot of things on paper, promises a lot of things in the marketing material, but when one actually drills down to the contract, those are qualified to such an extent that the technology sometimes becomes useless and becomes what is known as shelfware in the industry. So technology which you think you're procuring for a certain reason, you think it's going to achieve an objective, but because of the manner in which that technology may be constructed, you may not have done your due diligence on it, and because of ultimately what's set forth in your legal agreements with your solution providers, it actually renders that technology obsolete and useless to your organizations. And then obviously with any implementation of technology, ensuring that there's proper project management practices adopted, that is also critical. But like that, there's a number of interventions which boards can take, but ownership starts at board level, and it's critical that boards have a sound grasp of tying in their climate tech adoption with their overall ESG goals and objectives.
Well, Ridwaan, thanks very much for that breakdown. It certainly seems like you need to be very careful that the benefits outweigh the risks, but of course there's so much opportunity out there as well, and you don't want to neglect that as long as you have this framework. So thanks very much for that guidance. I think is really critical and important out there as technology races ahead. So thanks very much. Great chatting to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Ed.